Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sonia's English podcast.
Thank you, Sonia. Today we're talking about one of the greatest personalities in Islamic history, Hazrat Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him.
Right, and for those of you listening with us today, we are diving into the life of a man who literally took over a community that was, it was completely collapsing. I mean, he faced false prophets, mass rebellions, and the absolutely devastating loss of the community's founder.
Yeah, and he did all of this. He turned it around in just 27 months, which is, it's honestly incredible. He didn't just save the community from extinction. He really laid the foundation for a global civilization.
Exactly. But the wildest part to me is how he did it. Like, on his very first day in power, he stands in front of his people and basically asks them to correct him. He tells them to disobey him if he ever strays from the truth.
Which is just the perfect way to frame this entire deep dive. Because what we're looking at is a total masterclass in servant leadership. I mean, that's what modern business minds call it today, right?
Right, servant leadership.
But to really grasp how extraordinary those 27 months were, we kind of have to strip away the grand titles. Forget Caliph or ruler for a second. We need to look at the environment that forged him.
So let's go back in time, long before any of that leadership stuff happened. For you listening, imagine the city of Makkah in the year 573 AD. It wasn't just some quiet, peaceful desert town.
Oh, definitely not. It was a massive, really cutthroat mercantile hub.
Yeah, a very brutal environment. Historically, this whole period in Arabia is known as the era of ignorance.
Yeah, Jahiliyyah. Society was just completely dominated by tribalism, massive egos, and really no moral boundaries. Power was everything. If you were weak, you had absolutely no rights.
But right in the middle of this harsh environment, a man is born. Now, his given name at birth was Abdullah. But in Arab culture, people were often known by a kunya, right?
Yeah, a kunya is a patronymic name. It's like a title based on being a father or having a specific characteristic. So his kunya was Abu Bakr. And honestly, that name became so universally famous that history basically only remembers him by it.
So Abu Bakr comes from a highly respected, noble family in the powerful Quraysh tribe, and he grows up to be this very wealthy, highly successful merchant.
Right, but his character is what stands out. I mean, in a society where heavy drinking and wild behavior were basically status symbols, he lived a remarkably clean life. Like, he never touched alcohol. Ever.
Which is so rare for a wealthy merchant at that time.
Totally rare. And he actually explained his reasoning later in life. He said he wanted to protect his honor and his intellect. In a culture that loved losing control, he just valued clear thinking above all else.
He knew a clouded mind couldn't make good decisions.
Exactly.
There was also this tragically common practice back then that really shows how dark things were. Out of false pride or extreme economic fear, some tribes would literally bury their newborn baby girls alive.
It's horrifying. Just a horrifying thought for us today.
It really is. But even before Islam introduced a divine law against it, Abu Bakr found this practice absolutely sickening.
Because he had this profound internal moral compass. He possessed this innate protective goodness. Like, long before any divine revelation came to Makkah, people knew him as a soft-hearted man who always stood up for the vulnerable.
People trusted him completely, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They would literally leave their life savings with him for safekeeping. His honesty was just absolute.
Which brings us to his relationship with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They were the closest of friends since they were young. And history tells us that when the Prophet received the very first revelation from God, Abu Bakr was the first adult free man to accept Islam.
Yes, and the detail that is just so fascinating is how he accepted it. There was no hesitation. None at all.
He didn't ask for proof.
No, he didn't. The Prophet actually reflected on this later. He said that whenever he invited anyone else to this new faith, there was always some hesitation. A moment of processing where they'd ask a question or demand a miracle.
Which is normal human behavior.
Right, it's completely normal. But with Abu Bakr, zero hesitation. He heard the message and just instantly accepted it. And that immediate, absolute belief earned him the title as Siddiq.
As Siddiq, meaning the truthful, right? Or the one who confirms the truth.
Exactly.
Let's analyze that for a second. Because for you and me, living in our modern world, we are so driven by data and skepticism. If a lifelong friend comes to you with a massive claim about a divine revelation, human nature says you ask questions.
Oh, for sure. You want evidence.
Right. So how does someone reach a level of certainty where they just skip the evidence phase entirely?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to this idea of moral resonance. Think about two perfectly tuned musical instruments. If you strike a note on one, the other vibrates in harmony, right? Without even being touched.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Well, Abu Bakr had spent his whole life purifying his own character. He already hated the cruelty of Makkah. So when his closest friend, A man whose flawless character he had seen for decades presents a message of pure justice and charity and worship of one God.
It just perfectly matched his own soul.
Yes, it matched his frequency. He didn't need data because his internal moral compass recognized the truth immediately.
That is so inspiring. It's not about blind faith at all. It's about supreme character recognition. But, having that trust is one thing. Actually paying the price for it is another.
Oh, definitely. Because accepting this message in Bakr basically put a huge target on your back.
The ruling class saw this message of equality as a direct threat to their money and their power.
And the persecution was terrifying. The leaders of the Quraysh started systematically torturing the most vulnerable Muslims, especially the enslaved people who didn't have any tribal protection.
And this is where we see Abu Bakr do something amazing with his wealth. We said he was a rich merchant, but instead of buying influence or safety for himself, he basically weaponized his wealth for human rights.
He really did. He launched this massive single-handed emancipation campaign. He just started buying persecuted slaves just to set them free.
Like Hazrat Bilal.
Yes, the most famous case is Bilal. He was an enslaved man whose master was torturing him by dragging him out into the burning desert. The master would put massive scorching boulders on his chest, trying to force him to give up his faith.
Just horrible.
And Abu Bakr walks right up, pays this exorbitant price to buy Bilal, and instantly sets him free.
He didn't just spend his money, though. He put his own physical body on the line, like the incident at the Kaaba.
Oh, right. That was a terrifying moment.
He wanted to preach the message of Islam openly, which was incredibly
life-threatening. When he stood up in the sacred precinct to speak, the crowd violently turned on him. The ruling elite beat him so badly that he was trampled. He was left completely unconscious.
History says his injuries were so catastrophic, his face was unrecognizable.
Yeah, they carried him home, and he was just hovering between life and death.
Put yourself in that situation for a second. If you wake up from a near-fatal beating, your first instinct is survival. You ask for a doctor or water, or maybe you're just angry and want revenge.
Naturally.
But when he finally regained consciousness, what was his very first question?
His mother and his tribe are standing there, waiting for him to speak. He opens his eyes in all this agony and says, "How is the prophet?"
Wow.
He literally refused to eat or drink anything until they physically carried him to see his friend, just to make sure he was safe.
That just shifts the dynamic entirely. It's not just politics. It's this all-consuming love and loyalty that overrides basic survival instinct.
And that loyalty is exactly why he was chosen for the most dangerous mission in early Islamic history, the Hijra, or the migration.
Right, because the situation in Makkah had gotten so bad. There was a coordinated assassination plot against the prophet.
The tribes had agreed to strike him simultaneously, so no single tribe could be blamed. And right at that critical moment, the command came to migrate to the city of Medina. And out of everyone, the prophet chose Abu Bakr as his sole companion for this journey.
Let's talk about the mechanics of this escape, because it's intense. You've got expert desert trackers hunting them, and the ruling elite put a massive bounty of 100 camels on their heads. Dead or alive.
And to put that in perspective for our listeners, 100 camels back then is like a multi-million-dollar lottery ticket today. It would change your family's destiny for generations.
So every mercenary in the region is out looking for them.
Exactly. So to avoid capture, they didn't just walk straight to Medina. They used tactical deception. They went the opposite direction, south of Makkah, and climbed this rugged mountain called Mount Thar.
And they hid near the peak, inside this tiny, dark cave.
Picture the terror of that. You're in a confined, dark space. The bounty on your life is astronomical. And outside, you can literally hear the voices and footsteps of the assassins pacing right above the cave.
The psychological pressure must have been unbearable.
Abu Bakr looked at the opening of the cave and realized something horrifying. The entrance was so low that if the trackers just looked down at their own feet, they would easily see them.
He was terrified, right?
He was overwhelmed with fear, but again, his psychology was unique. He whispered to his companion that he wasn't crying for his own life. He said if he died, it was just the loss of one man. But if the prophet were killed, it would be the death of the entire message.
He was worried about the truth surviving, but the prophet didn't panic at all in that high-stress moment.
No, he had absolute unshakable calm. He turned to his terrified friend and delivered this line that is actually immortalized in the Holy Quran. He said, "Do not grieve. Indeed, Allah is with us."
That's how the Quran respectfully refers to it.
Yes. And the narrative explains that a profound peace just descended into his heart right then and there.
And the way they were physically protected is so fascinating. because it totally defies military logic. You have heavily armed trackers hunting them, and the defense system wasn't a giant boulder or a weapon.
No, it was the most fragile things in nature. It's a brilliant display of divine protection hiding in plain sight. As the trackers got close, they saw that a spider had spun a thick web completely across the cave opening.
And right next to it, a wild pigeon had built a nest and laid eggs.
Right. So from an expert tracker's perspective, they look at the undisturbed web and the nesting bird, and their logic tells them it's physically impossible for two grown men to have gone inside without destroying the web or scaring the bird away.
So they trust the environmental evidence and just walk away.
Exactly. It teaches this powerful lesson for us today. Protection doesn't always look like impenetrable armor or massive armies. Sometimes the universe protects its most vital truths with the delicate threads of a spider's web.
That is a beautiful thought. So after 3 grueling days in that cave, the search parties gave up, and they finally navigated the desert and arrived safely in Medina.
Yes, but, arriving in Medina didn't mean the extreme sacrifices were over. His devotion just evolved. Instead of throwing his body in front of physical danger, he started liquidating his remaining wealth to build a new society.
Right, the first infrastructure project was the Prophet's Mosque.
Exactly. The ideal plot of land belonged to 2 young orphans. Their guardians actually offered to donate the land for free, since it was for a holy purpose.
But the Prophet firmly refused, right? He wouldn't take advantage of them.
He insisted the orphans must be paid the full market value. So Abu Bakr immediately stepped forward and bought the land with his own money.
Which is a great example of ethical economy from day one. You don't build a place of worship by shortchanging orphans. But the story of his wealth gets much more extreme. Let's fast forward to the Tabuk expedition.
The context there is critical. The growing Muslim state was facing a massive external military threat from the north. They desperately needed an army, soldiers, provisions.
But this was during a period of intense drought, right?
Severe economic hardship. It was incredibly hot, the harvest was almost ready, and people were really struggling. So the leadership put out an urgent call for donation.
And normally when a state asks for emergency funds, people calculate what they can spare. Like Umar brought exactly half of his wealth, which is an incredible sacrifice.
It's huge. But Abu Bakr arrived and placed all his wealth before the Prophet, literally everything he owned.
And the Prophet asked him a very practical question. What did you leave for your family?
And Abu Bakr simply said, I have left for them Allah and his Prophet.
I really have to stop and think about that, because if we view this through a modern lens, giving away 100% of your wealth seems, well, deeply irresponsible.
It does to us, sure.
Today, our whole concept of safety is tied to financial security, emergency funds, retirement. If someone emptied their bank accounts today for a cause, we'd think they lost their mind. How do we understand a psychology where giving away everything feels like a victory?
That's the friction between modern materialism and deep spiritual detachment. You and I view wealth as something we own, a wall of security. He viewed wealth fundamentally differently. To him, wealth was just a temporary tool entrusted to him by God.
So he didn't feel attached to it.
Right. He deeply internalized the belief that the only wealth you actually keep for eternity is the wealth you give away for justice and truth.
It completely inverts how we calculate value.
It does. And there's a vital concept here called barakah, which translates to unseen divine blessing. The logic is when you give with absolute sincerity, God injects a qualitative blessing into your life that you can't measure on a spreadsheet.
Right, your meager resources stretch beyond physical explanation, like the incident with the miracle of the food.
That is a remarkable story. In early Medina, there was a group of deeply impoverished Muslims known as the Al-Sufa, essentially homeless scholars who lived on the shaded platform of the mosque.
They had no families, no income.
Exactly. And Abu Bakr often fed them. One evening, he invited a group of these hungry men to his home for dinner, but he had to leave for some community matters and got delayed.
So his family eventually just served the guests the meal.
Right. And when Abu Bakr finally returned, he found them eating. But as he watched, he noticed something impossible happen. Every time a guest took a handful of food from the serving dish, the food miraculously multiplied from beneath.
Wait, so they're eating, but the food is actively increasing?
Precisely. They ate until they were completely full. And when Abu Bakr's wife looked at the communal dish, she was astounded. She swore there was 3 times more food in the bowl than when they started.
That's incredible.
Abu Bakr recognized it immediately. It wasn't magic, it was the physical manifestation of barakah.
And he even sent the massive amount of leftover food to the Prophet's house so more families. It really suggests that when generosity is pure, the universe responds in ways that defy logic.
It really does. It sets up his entire worldview. And honestly, he would need every ounce of that spiritual grounding for what was about to happen next, because the ultimate test of his character was approaching.
The passing of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this was without a doubt the greatest shock this young community ever endured.
You have to understand the psychological state of the community then. The Prophet wasn't just a political leader. He was their spiritual father, their judge, their direct connection to divine guidance.
When the news of his death started to circulate, the grief was so intense the society it fractured instantly.
People were wandering the streets in tears. Some were paralyzed by shock, and some were in aggressive denial, like Umar.
Umar, who was known for his fierce strength, he completely snapped.
He drew his sword in the middle of the crowd and threatened to strike down anyone who dared to say the Prophet was dead. He claimed the Prophet had just gone to speak with God, like Moses did, and would return.
It just shows the sheer terror of a community losing its anchor. They were on the brink of psychological collapse.
And into this highly volatile environment, Abu Bakr arrives. He calmly walks past the panicked crowds, goes straight into the room where the Prophet lay, and kisses the forehead of his lifelong friend.
He wept, acknowledging the reality. And then he stepped outside to face the hysteria.
He told Umar to sit down. When Umar wouldn't, Abu Bakr just bypassed him and started speaking directly to the crowd. And his words are breathtaking.
What did he say?
He delivered a masterstroke of theological grounding. He said, "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, let them know that Muhammad is dead. But whoever worships God, let them know that God is alive and never dies."
Wow.
Then he recited a verse from the Quran. "Muhammad is but a messenger. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels?"
It's so profound. He immediately separated the eternal message from the mortal messenger. He forced them to realize their faith couldn't be tied to the physical survival of one human being.
And that single speech broke the hysteria. It brought Umar to his knees. Abu Bakr single-handedly anchored a disintegrating nation back to reality.
But saving them from emotional collapse was only step one. They immediately faced a massive political crisis. Who is going to lead them?
Right. The leaders of the various factions hastily gathered at a place called Saqifah. It was essentially an emergency constitutional convention. Tensions were incredibly high.
There was a very real danger of a civil war breaking out right there.
It was a delicate negotiation. But the companions looked at the facts. Abu Bakr was the closest companion, the one chosen for the hijrah, the one who led prayers when the Prophet was ill. Recognizing his unshakable wisdom, the community united and elected him as the first caliph.
So he's handed the reins to the state. The very next day, he stands at the pulpit for his inaugural address. And for anyone listening who is interested in organizational psychology or management, this speech is a goldmine.
Oh, absolutely. He stood before the people and declared, "I have been appointed over you, though I am not the best among you. If I do well, help me. If I act wrongly, correct me." Yes, truthfulness is a trust, and lying is a treason. Obey me so long as I obey Allah and his messenger. But if I disobey them, you owe me no obedience.
Let's unpack that because it contradicts how power usually operates. Think about modern politics or a new CEO today. On day one, the goal is always to project absolute strength and unquestionable authority.
Exactly. You never say, "I am not the best. Please correct me if I mess up."
No, but that is what makes it a revolutionary concept of servant leadership. He totally dismantled the idea of absolute monarchy. By saying, "Obey me only as long as I obey the law," he placed himself beneath the constitution of their faith, not above it.
He drafted a social contract of accountability. It applies perfectly to modern ethical decision-making today.
It really does. If a modern leader, a politician, or even a parent says, "My authority is conditional on my adherence to our shared values, and it's your duty to hold me accountable," you're inviting collective ownership instead of blind obedience.
Precisely. And he needed that collective trust immediately, because this humble man was about to face the most terrifying military crisis imaginable, the Ridda Wars, or the Wars of Apostasy.
Walk us through what caused these Ridda Wars. Why did the whole Arabian Peninsula suddenly explode into rebellion?
It comes down to how different tribes understood statehood. In the 7th century, political alliances were deeply personal. Many distant tribes viewed their allegiance not as integration into a nation, but as a personal, temporary treaty with Prophet Muhammad.
So when he passed away, they felt the contract was void.
Exactly. They saw an opportunity to reclaim their independent tribal sovereignty. And the rebellion took two forms. The first was false prophets, opportunistic leaders claiming divine inspiration to unite their own regions.
Like Musaylima the liar.
Yes. And the second form was from tribes who said they still believed in Islam, they'd still pray, but they flatly refused to pay zakat to Medina, zakat being the obligatory wealth tax to support the poor and the state.
They refused to send a single coin to Abu Bakr. Now, this is where I need to push back on his decision-making. Strategically, the state is surrounded. False prophets are raising armies. Umar and other companions advise him to be pragmatic, let the zakat issue go for now, accept their prayers and keep. From a purely strategic standpoint, isn't he being reckless to reject that advice?
That is the exact tension of the moment. Umar looked at it through military survival, But Abu Bakr looked at it through structural integrity. He vehemently refused. He swore an oath, declaring, "By God, if they withhold even a single piece of rope that they used to give to the messenger of God, I will fight them for it."
But why risk a multi-front civil war over a rope?
Because he understood the fundamental difference between a religion and a personal lifestyle choice. Zakat and prayer are twin pillars. If you allow tribes to pick and choose which laws to follow based on political convenience, you destroy the moral structure of the state.
If they drop zakat today, they'll drop fasting tomorrow.
Exactly. Within a generation, the unified message would disintegrate into 100 customized tribal cults. He realized compromising core principles for short-term peace would result in long-term spiritual collapse.
He was fighting against the fragmentation of the truth.
So he held the line. He dispatched 11 separate armies across the desert, with brilliant generals like Khalid bin Walid. But how he fought is just as important as why.
Right, because in a war for survival, human instinct says total war, do whatever it takes, crush the enemy mercilessly. But he issued a strict code of conduct that was incredibly advanced for the 7th century.
His rules of engagement were revolutionary. He ordered his armies, do not commit treachery, do not mutilate the dead, do not kill any child, woman, or elderly person, do not cut down or burn fruit-bearing trees.
Even the trees.
Yes. Do not slaughter flocks except for your immediate food. And he explicitly told them to leave monks and places of worship alone.
That is a staggering level of discipline to demand from soldiers in the heat of a desert conflict. It shows he balanced iron resolve to win with profound compassion. You can't claim the moral high ground while using immoral tactics.
That ethical framework saved the dignity of the state, and ultimately his firmness paid off. The generals defeated the false prophets and brought the tribes back. The state was saved. But solving one crisis triggered another, perhaps even more terrifying crisis.
Right, the preservation of the Holy Quran. To understand this, we have to look at the Battle of Yamama.
The bloodiest conflict of the Ridda Wars. The Muslim forces were victorious, but the casualties were devastating. Among the martyrs were hundreds of Hufaz.
And for you listening, a Hafiz is someone who has memorized the entire Quran word for word in their heart. Because back then, oral memorization was the primary method of preserving.
They were walking, breathing libraries of divine revelation. Seeing so many slaughters sent a shockwave of panic through Umar. He rushed to Abu Bakr with a terrifying realization: if more Hufaz die, entire portions of the Quran might be lost forever.
Umar urged him to compile the Quran into a single book. But Abu Bakr deeply hesitated, didn't he?
He was terrified of the idea. His entire philosophy was based on strictly following the Prophet's action. The Prophet had never ordered the Quran compiled into a single-bound book during his life, largely because revelations were still actively coming down.
So he told Umar, how can I do something the messenger of God did not do?
He feared introducing an unauthorized innovation. But Umar persistently argued that the context had shifted. The revelation was complete, the Prophet was gone, and the walking libraries were dying.
It was an absolute necessity to protect the faith.
And Abu Bakr eventually realized Umar was right. The greater good demanded it. So he appointed a brilliant young companion, Zayd bin Thabit, to lead the compilation. Zayd later said that if Abu Bakr had ordered him to move a mountain, it would have felt easier.
Let's talk about the mechanics of how Zayd did it. You called it a 7th century version of two-factor authentication.
I love that analogy because it's so accurate. Zayd didn't just write from his own memory. Abu Bakr required a rigorous methodology. Verses had been dictated on date palm branches, flat stones, pieces of leather, and camel bones.
That's the hardware data.
Exactly. Zayd announced that anyone possessing a physical fragment must bring it forward. But the physical fragment wasn't enough. Zayd required the physical writing plus the oral recitation from the companion's memories, the software data.
And he required 2 independent witnesses to swear an oath that they physically saw the Prophet dictate that exact verse onto that exact piece of bone or leather.
Yes. Every single verse had to pass this multi-layered forensic audit before it went into the final manuscript. Through this obsessive attention to detail, they compiled the very first unified mushaf, a complete, verified written copy of the Quran.
Without Abu Bakr's careful, methodical leadership here, the unified preservation of the Quran as we know it might not exist.
It's a monumental legacy. He saved the state's boundaries and its spiritual core. But, the true essence of a leader is often found in the quiet, unobserved moments of daily life.
Let's look at those. Because the military and political victories show us his capability, but the quiet moments reveal his soul, like the story of the blind woman.
Yes. Umar was always observing Abu Bakr, trying to learn from him. One morning, Umar noticed that right after the dawn prayer, Abu Bakr secretly slipped away and walked to a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of Medina.
Umar followed him, right?
He did. You're tracking the most powerful man in Arabia, expecting secret intelligence meetings. But Umar found that inside lived an elderly, blind woman with no family.
And she had no idea who was visiting her.
None. Umar asked her later, and she said, I don't know his name, but he comes every morning. He sweeps my floor, washes my clothes, prepares my food, and milks my sheep before leaving.
Umar broke down weeping when he heard that.
He said, Abu Bakr, you have made it impossibly difficult for anyone who comes after you to ever match your standard.
That is servant leadership in action. He didn't delegate the care of the most marginalized person to an aide. He did the manual labor himself in secret. And this extreme integrity extended to the Baytul Mal, the public treasury.
When he became caliph, he got a very modest stipend just for basic survival, since he had to give up his merchant business to run the state.
And one day, his wife wanted a sweet dish, a simple luxury. But Abu Bakr told her they didn't have the extra funds in their allowance.
So over an entire month, his wife carefully pinched pennies. She saved tiny fractions from their daily food allowance until she had enough to buy the ingredients, and she happily brought the coins to him.
Any normal husband would say, great job, let's have a treat. But his mind operated on a completely different ethical.
He looked at the coins and made a profound deduction. He said, if we were able to survive this month while saving this amount, it proves the state allowance is actually more than our absolute basic need.
He penalized himself for her good budgeting.
In his eyes, surplus money belonged to the public. He deposited the savings back into the treasury, and he went a step further. He permanently cut his own future salary by that exact amount.
Imagine a modern CEO or president auditing their own expenses, finding a surplus, returning it to the taxpayers, and permanently slashing their own salary to match the new baseline. It's almost comical to imagine today.
Because it's so divorced from modern human greed, it's about strict self-accountability, holding yourself to the highest possible standard of honesty, even when the law allows you to take more.
There's one final story I want to touch on because it demonstrates his ultimate loyalty, the principle of faith for blood.
Right, involving his son. Before his son converted to Islam, he actually fought against the Muslims in the early engagements, like the Battle of Badr.
Yes, and years later, after the son had converted and the wars were over, they were reminiscing. The son made a confession out of deep love for his father.
He said, Father, during the Battle of Badr, you were in my sights as a target twice. I had a clear shot, but because of my love for you, I lowered my weapon and spared your life.
Now, a typical father would be relieved, but Abu Bakr's reply was startling. He looked at his son and said, by God, if you had been exposed to me as a target, I would not have turned away from you. To our modern ears, telling your son you would have killed him in battle sounds incredibly harsh. How do we contextualize that?
It's not a lack of love, it's the supremacy of the truth. In that era, blood and tribal loyalty were the ultimate gods. You defended your family, right or wrong. He was completely dismantling that toxic framework.
He was telling his son that he wasn't fighting for ego or tribe, he was defending absolute.
And his commitment to God was higher than any worldly attachment, even his own flesh and blood. He established that justice cannot be compromised by nepotism. It is the ultimate expression of integrity.
If we synthesize all of this, the military strategies, compiling the holy text, the secret charity, the financial scrupulousness, we see a remarkably complete picture of human potential.
And remember the timeline. Unifying Arabia, establishing rules of war, securing the treasury, preserving the Quran. All of this happened in a window of just 27 months.
It's one of the most concentrated periods of effective leadership in human history. He took a society days away from complete disintegration and transformed it into a unified, principled state.
And he did it by perfectly blending total humility with unbreakable courage. He was wealthy, powerful, universally loved. Yet the title he cherished most was simply As-Siddiq, the truthful servant of God.
His legacy is a constant reminder to all of us. True authority isn't forcing people to obey you blindly. It's found in serving others, remaining fiercely accountable and staying faithful to the truth no matter the cost.
I want our listeners to really turn inward for a moment and reflect on these concepts. How can you practice that kind of secret, unacknowledged charity in your own neighborhood?
Or how can you apply that extreme self-accountability in your daily life, your workplace, your finances? These are highly practical blueprints for building noble character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the broader societal question is just as important.
Which leaves me with this final thought for you to ponder. We look at the chaos of our modern world today. The political corruption, corporate greed, constant clash of egos. How would our world fundamentally transform tomorrow if every leader, manager, and parent prioritized truth and absolute service over their own power?
What if on their first day they all said, correct me if I am wrong and disobey me if I stray from justice?
It would rewrite the fabric of modern society entirely. Thank you so much for joining us today for this exploration of an incredibly inspiring life. We hope these stories challenge you and elevate your understanding of what true leadership looks like. Until next time, take care and keep seeking.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for listening.